Imagine waking up one morning to find out that the people shaping the future, the ones quietly steering systems, bending outcomes, and deciding what succeeds and what disappears, are not smarter than you, not luckier than you, but calmer, more controlled, more disciplined inside than anyone around them. And here's the uncomfortable question most people avoid. If power today rewards inner stillness over raw effort, why are you still reacting while others are directing? Why does it burn when you realize that the chaos exhausting you is the very thing fueling someone else's advantage? Stoicism warned us about this long ago, that the greatest threat to a person is not the world, but their unchecked impulses within it. While most people chase validation, complain about unfairness, or wait for motivation, those who dominate have learned to master themselves first. They don't win by force, they win by refusing to be shaken. And the truth that tears at the ego is this: until you gain authority over your own emotions, attention, and reactions, you will always be living inside someone else's strategy. If this way of thinking challenges you, that's a good sign. It means you're standing at the edge of growth instead of comfort. Also consider subscribing as a commitment to yourself, to clarity over chaos, to discipline over distraction, to a life guided by principle instead of impulse. Modern power doesn't wear a crown. It doesn't need one. It walks silently through rooms, making decisions that reshape the landscape without ever raising its voice. It's not always the loudest person at the table. Often it's the one who speaks last, or not at all. You won't always see it in headlines or hear it in speeches, because true power doesn't need to be announced. It's structured, embedded, the kind that hides behind data dashboards and strategy calls, behind policies and platforms, shaping the future while everyone else is distracted by noise. But the real source of this power isn't external. It begins in the inner world. The ability to remain still while others are reacting, to watch while others rush, to design while others scramble. That's where Stoicism lives, not in some ancient scroll, but in the disciplined minds of those who prepare before pressure arrives. They don't need perfect conditions, they build conditions. While others look for shortcuts, they are laying foundations, not to win today, but to own the terrain tomorrow. Think of the moments where you feel rushed, provoked, or insecure. In those moments, who's really in control? The world or you? Because the person who owns their reactions owns the room. Stoicism doesn't tell you to run away from life. It tells you to stay planted when the storm comes. That's the real test. Not how loud you can be when things are calm, but how still you can be when the world's spinning. You have power over your mind, not outside events, wrote Marcus Aurelius. Realize this, and you will find strength. That single realization separates those who are ruled from those who rule. The strongest minds aren't reacting to the world, they're constructing it. They move slowly, not because they're lost, but because they're shaping every step. Their pace is deliberate, their silence is intentional, and their position, by the time you notice it, has already become necessary. That's the hidden throne, not built on attention but on architecture, not defended by aggression but by foresight. And the ones who sit on it didn't demand the seat. They created the structure it sits on. When you start seeing the world this way, everything shifts. The people who seem to always win stop looking lucky. You notice the calm behind their eyes, the quiet preparation behind their moves. They don't wait for opportunities. They design environments where opportunities become inevitable. It's not about luck, it's about clarity. And that clarity is earned through stillness. While the crowd reacts, they observe. While the noise escalates, they conserve. And when it's time to act, they do so with a precision that looks like instinct, but is really discipline disguised as ease. Stoicism isn't about removing yourself from the world. It's about becoming the kind of person who can stand inside the world without being consumed by it. The chaos doesn't vanish, but it loses its grip on you. Inner control becomes outer influence, and eventually you realize something profound. You don't need to overpower people to lead them. You only need to stop being led by your own volatility. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That's not just philosophy, it's leverage. Because once your emotions no longer own you, the people who try to provoke them lose their power. And in that space, where you're no longer at the mercy of impulse, you can think, decide, strategize. The terrain becomes yours. And it's not just about business or leadership, it's about life. The hidden throne shows up everywhere, in relationships, in decisions, in how you show up when it would be easier to hide. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the one who speaks first. It's the one who listens without rushing to respond, who waits not out of fear, but out of awareness. And by the time they move, the outcome is already shaped. Power isn't in the moment you act. It's in the 1,000 unseen moments you prepared for it. Seneca wrote, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and those operating from a Stoic core are always preparing, calmly, quietly, without announcing it. Because they don't need to prove they're ready, they simply are." Most people seek influence through attention, but attention is fleeting. What lasts is structure. What lasts is discipline. The quiet kind that can outlast panic. The kind that survives criticism without flinching. The kind that creates systems while others are chasing approval. That's the foundation of real power. Not charisma, not charm, but consistency. And behind that consistency is a choice. Not to be led by every passing wave of emotion, but to stand firm like a lighthouse while the tide changes around you. This is why the Stoic mind wins. Not through force, but through patience. Not by chasing control, but by becoming immune to losing it. They let others react. They let others show their hand. And when the time is right, they move, but never prematurely, because they understand the terrain they've built, and by then, the rules are theirs. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's the difference. The Stoic doesn't wait for fate. They bring what's unconscious into awareness. They live on purpose, not by accident. So next time you feel pressured to speak, to act, to prove something, pause. Ask yourself, what would a still mind do here? Because you're not just reacting in a moment, you're building a terrain. And if you build it right, you won't need to chase the crown. You'll wake up one day and realize it's already yours. It's one of the most misunderstood traits in modern power, calmness. We live in a world that rewards the loud, the dramatic, the visibly intense. We're told that energy is influence, that urgency equals leadership. But there's a different kind of presence, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't rush, and doesn't ask for validation. It simply is. And that kind of presence is far more dangerous. Because when you're around someone who doesn't flinch, who isn't performing, who listens more than they speak, something inside you starts paying attention. You don't know why, but you trust it. You feel like they've already seen the worst and decided not to panic. That's not weakness. That's practiced inner discipline. That's stability. And it's the weapon of those who've trained themselves to act, not react. The still mind doesn't mean the absent mind. It means control over the storm inside. And when you've reached that point, when you no longer need applause to feel confident, when you don't chase noise to feel alive, you become harder to move. You become the anchor in every room. Most people collapse into emotion without realizing it. They get swept up in someone else's urgency, drama, or insecurity, but the Stoic doesn't. They stay planted, and that quiet steadiness creates space. It creates gravity. It draws people in, not because it's flashy, but because it's solid. "He is a wise man," said Aristotle, "who is not distressed by the things which he has no control over." And the wisest leaders know this. You don't gain trust by controlling others. You gain it by controlling yourself when everyone else is losing grip. Real stability isn't about pretending emotions don't exist. It's about choosing which ones deserve your energy. It's the difference between someone who reacts to every minor comment and someone who pauses, weighs the moment, and only speaks when it counts. That kind of restraint doesn't go unnoticed. It makes people curious. Why isn't this person rattled? Why don't they need to dominate the conversation? Why do they feel, somehow, already decided? And the answer is simple. They've done the work on themselves. They've asked the hard questions in silence. They've faced their own insecurities in private. And so when life tests them, they don't fall apart. They simply absorb the moment and decide their response. And that decision, that ability to respond with clarity when others are clouded, is what gives them power. There's something magnetic about someone who isn't easily impressed or intimidated, who doesn't chase after popularity or try to outshine others. Their focus is internal. They're not trying to win the room. They're trying to win their own mind. And the paradox is, that's exactly why the room listens. People want to follow someone who isn't constantly chasing something outside themselves, someone who doesn't need the spotlight to validate their worth. That stability gives others permission to breathe. It makes them feel safe. And in leadership, that kind of emotional safety is more powerful than charisma. You'll find this in every domain of influence. The ones who last are the ones who can weather pressure without becoming the pressure. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they choose when and how to feel. Carl Jung said, "The ability to bear emotional tension is the measure of a man's personality." And that's what we're seeing. These minds aren't detached, they're regulated. They don't suppress emotion, they just don't leak it everywhere. They hold it, they metabolize it, and then they move forward with precision, not panic. Most people don't realize how exhausting it is to constantly manage their image, their reactions, their need to be liked. The Stoic mind frees itself from that cycle. It stops performing and starts focusing, not on how things look, but on how things are, not on being impressive, but on being consistent. That consistency becomes their shield. People try to provoke them and fail. People try to rattle them and see no result. And slowly, something shifts. That steadiness becomes power, not because it dominates, but because it refuses to be dominated. Think of the strongest people you've met. Chances are they weren't the loudest in the room. They weren't trying to convince you of anything. They were simply there, unmoved. You felt it. The calm, the clarity, the unspoken depth. That's what emotional stability does. It creates invisible leverage. While others try to force outcomes, the Stoic watches the tide, adjusts their sail, and uses the winds to move in silence. They don't break under criticism. They don't inflate under praise. They remain centered, grounded, intentional. And that's why people follow them, not because they promise everything will be fine, but because they act as if they've already endured worse and come out better. Their history lives in their posture. Their scars have become structure, and their silence speaks louder than someone else's shouting. Seneca put it well, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." But the Stoic knows. They know where they're going, so they don't panic when the wind shifts. They adapt. And that adaptability is born from one thing: inner peace. Not the kind that floats away on a retreat, but the kind you build in the middle of hard choices. The kind you earn by telling yourself the truth when it's uncomfortable. The kind that grows when you stop needing others to make you feel steady, because you've finally learned how to do it yourself. That's the real advantage. Emotional independence. Not as rebellion, but as clarity. Not as isolation, but as self-respect. And once you have that, you're no longer threatened by someone else's chaos. You can observe it without stepping into it. You can respond without defending. And that's when you become untouchable. Not because you fight back harder, but because you don't need to fight back at all. In a world that tells you to be louder, stronger, more aggressive, the greatest rebellion is calm. True calm. Not numbness, not disconnection, but powerful, deliberate restraint. The kind that holds the room without raising its voice. The kind that turns stillness into structure. And if you build that brick by brick, you won't need to prove yourself anymore. You'll just become the one they turn to when everything else begins to fall apart. Power doesn't always arrive in the form of commands or control. Sometimes it walks into a room and doesn't say a word, yet everything shifts. You've felt it before. That quiet tension when someone enters with no need to prove themselves. No excessive charm, no forced dominance, just presence. And that presence, when shaped with intention, becomes more persuasive than any speech. You don't need to tell people who you are when you've mastered how they perceive you. That's the edge so many overlook. They're busy performing, announcing, explaining, while the Stoic shapes perception without needing to say much at all. The modern Stoic doesn't manipulate, they calibrate. They understand that every choice is a message, every pause a punctuation, every glance a decision. They don't tell you how powerful they are, they let you feel it. And what you feel is not intimidation, it's clarity. You sense that this is someone who knows who they are, and because they know, you start to reflect. Not on them, but on yourself in their presence. That shift is subtle but transformative. It's the difference between someone who demands respect and someone who evokes it effortlessly, between being loud and being seen. And when people begin to see you through a lens you've crafted, that perception becomes harder to challenge, harder to question, harder to ignore. Most people waste energy trying to explain their value. They defend, they justify, they over-explain. But the Stoic understands something deeper. Value doesn't need a sales pitch when it's lived. The moment you stop needing to convince others, you free yourself to become the kind of person others naturally lean toward. Not because you asked them to, but because you gave them no reason not to. Perception, once shaped intentionally, becomes armor, not because it blocks anything, but because it protects the frame. If people see you as composed, they treat you differently. If they see you as dependable, they respond to your silence as strategy, not absence. And when they see you as necessary, they adjust their moves around yours. What's often forgotten is that you don't control how others see you by force. You do it through consistency. That's the invisible thread. You show up the same way, grounded, clear, and deliberate, until the pattern writes its own story. Over time, people begin to expect your presence to feel a certain way. That expectation becomes identity. That identity becomes trust. And once people trust the version of you that you've consistently shown, they stop questioning. The perception hardens. That's where influence begins, not in the moment you speak, but in the image people already hold before you arrive. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But once you do, your presence changes. It stops being reactive and starts becoming directive. You're no longer echoing the world, you're shaping it." The Stoic doesn't chase image, they refine essence. And that essence becomes so strong, so rooted, that the world begins to notice, not because it's loud, but because it's undeniable. And when people can't easily define you, they start to pay more attention. They lean in, they study, and eventually they adjust their tone, their rhythm, even their confidence. Because the way you carry yourself quietly demands it. Think of how many times someone's demeanor changed the energy of a room, not because they were forceful, but because they were aligned. That kind of alignment isn't accidental. It's built through practice, reflection, and restraint. It's choosing not to react when provoked. It's learning when to speak and when to stay silent. It's trusting that your value doesn't need to be constantly defended. That's the inner work no one sees, but everyone feels. It doesn't show up on stage. It shows up in posture, in tone, in the way your eyes don't dart when the pressure rises. And that steadiness creates a perception of someone who doesn't just move through the world, but influences how the world moves around them. You begin to realize something powerful. That influence isn't about being liked. It's about being understood, or at times, even being misunderstood in a way that still strengthens your position. That's the paradox of perception. Sometimes when people don't fully know how to read you, they begin to project strength onto you. The unknown, when paired with calmness, becomes authority, and the person who can live comfortably in that space of being partially seen but fully aligned is the one others begin to respect without being told to. It's tempting to correct every misinterpretation, to defend your intentions, to make sure everyone knows who you really are. But that's not mastery. That's insecurity wearing confidence. The Stoic doesn't need to correct every narrative because they know that over time, perception will settle where truth has been consistent, and consistency is the true sculptor of reputation. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." When your behavior matches your vision, when your habits reflect your values, when your silence matches your strength, others take notice. Eventually, people stop watching your words and start reading your pattern. That's when perception becomes leverage. You no longer need to manage every impression. You've earned the space to be still, to be precise, to act without announcement. Because your presence now carries context, the context you've crafted through 100 silent decisions, and that context speaks before you do. So, while others focus on visibility, the Stoic focuses on meaning. They know that presence is not about being seen everywhere. It's about being remembered when it counts. It's about becoming the reference point in a room, not the decoration. And when you achieve that, when your presence is felt before your voice is heard, you've done something most people never will. You've stopped chasing perception and started designing it. The ones who master this don't float through life unnoticed. They move with precision, and over time, people stop asking what they do and start reflecting on how they feel around them. That reflection, when shaped wisely, becomes a kind of influence no one can copy. Because it wasn't manufactured, it was lived, built in silence, protected by integrity, and strengthened by the refusal to be anyone other than who you've already chosen to become. There's a quiet kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't chase attention or try to fill the silence with words. It just waits, calm, watchful, deliberate. And when it finally speaks, the entire room shifts. Not because the words are louder than everyone else's, but because they arrive when everyone else has already spent their energy trying to be heard. This kind of leadership isn't rare because it's complicated. It's rare because it requires discipline. The discipline to wait, the discipline to observe when ego wants to react, and the discipline to speak only when your words move the situation instead of just decorating it. Some people use speech to fill space. Others use silence to define it. That's the difference. And those who master this aren't avoiding engagement, they're preparing for it. Their quiet isn't emptiness, it's strategy. They don't withhold because they're unsure. They withhold because they're storing momentum. And when they finally decide to act or speak, the timing is so precise that it feels inevitable. That's not just communication, that's control. Because the one who controls their voice controls the frame, and the one who controls the frame controls the meaning. In Stoicism, restraint is not about withdrawal, it's about calibration. It's about understanding that words carry weight, and the more often they're thrown around, the lighter they become. The Stoic understands that presence doesn't require volume, it requires intention. And the most intentional person in the room is almost always the most powerful, even if they say the least. The world tends to confuse stillness for passivity, but predictable silence is not passivity. It's pressure. It's the slow tightening of awareness until a single sentence shifts the whole conversation. It's the art of using fewer words to do more work. There's something disarming about someone who isn't rushed into reaction. They don't interrupt, they don't speak over others, they don't defend themselves needlessly, and yet they command respect. Not by demanding it, but by creating an atmosphere where every word is deliberate. When they speak, it feels like something important is about to happen. Not because of volume, but because of timing. That rhythm, that patience becomes their signature. It creates anticipation. And anticipation makes people lean in, because in a world full of noise, silence becomes magnetic. Socrates once said, "The beginning of wisdom is silence." And that silence isn't about avoidance, it's about absorption. A wise leader listens not just to respond, but to understand. They let others reveal their intentions first. They collect patterns. They study the emotional tone of the room. And only when the time is right, they intervene, not with opinions, but with direction. And because they waited, their message doesn't compete. It lands. It resonates, it settles in the mind of others like a seed that's been waiting for the right soil. Predictable silence allows that kind of impact because it teaches people to associate your voice with value, not noise. Most people feel an uncomfortable urgency to respond immediately. They think fast answers equal strength. But the strongest minds are never in a rush to prove themselves. They understand that silence can be its own kind of communication, a boundary, a mirror, a filter. It makes others pause, it makes others reconsider, and over time it builds a reputation, one that says, "When I speak, it matters." Epictetus taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Those who live by that idea aren't trying to win arguments. They're mastering timing, and timing creates influence that arguments never will. There's a deep inner stillness in people who don't speak unless it improves the moment. They're not hiding, they're not afraid. They simply understand that their energy isn't meant to be wasted. They've learned that silence isn't something to fill, it's something to use. And when you learn to use it well, your words stop sounding like opinions and start sounding like decisions. That's what makes predictable silence powerful. People begin to recognize the pattern. They know you're not going to interrupt. They know you're not going to speak unless it changes something. And because of that, they wait. They listen. They give you the space others have to fight for. Even in negotiation, silence is leverage. In leadership, it's direction. In conflict, it's clarity. And in daily life, it's freedom. Because when you stop rushing to speak, you give yourself time to think, to see, to decide. And that window of reflection becomes your edge. It becomes the moment you catch what others miss, what they say in passing, what they reveal without knowing. And all of that becomes material you can use, not against them, but to move things forward when the time is right. Predictable silence gives you that space. It gives you room to build power without appearing to chase it. There's a different level of respect given to people who don't need to react. Their silence doesn't look like hesitation. It looks like certainty. Seneca wrote, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." And the ones who know that rarely need to raise their voice, because by the time they speak, the room is already aligned. They don't enter debates, they end them with clarity. They don't argue for influence. They wait until influence reveals itself in the space their silence created. This kind of control is earned, not declared. It's the result of self-trust, of knowing that your words are powerful enough to shape the moment, but only if you don't spend them carelessly. Once you've learned to hold your voice back until it has purpose, your presence becomes sharper, more concentrated, and the people around you stop expecting you to participate in every moment. They start watching for when you will. That change is subtle, but it changes everything. Predictable silence isn't about being cold or distant. It's about being aware of the weight you carry and choosing to use that weight with care. It's about knowing that not every situation requires your opinion, but the right moment might need your presence. It's about creating an energy around you that says, "I don't speak because I need to. I speak because the moment is ready." And in a world that runs on reaction, that kind of control is no longer just rare, it's unstoppable. There's a strange thing about human nature. People say they want strength, but what they really want is relatability. We trust people who stumble a little, who admit just enough to feel human, not too much, not so little that they seem distant, but just enough to feel approachable. And that's where a hidden kind of power emerges, controlled vulnerability. It's the art of showing flaws with precision, not to manipulate, not to lie, but to allow people to see a version of you they can understand, while keeping the real depth protected. It's a kind of strategic honesty, and those who've mastered it know how to reveal what invites connection without giving away what anchors control. Most people overshare in the name of authenticity. They spill everything, hoping it will make them more trusted. But the truth is, unfiltered vulnerability can be disorienting. It can erode confidence in your leadership. Stoic-minded individuals take a different route. They choose their cracks deliberately. They let you see a moment of failure, a past misstep, a personal challenge, but they wrap it in the context of growth. They offer the flaw, then show the function it served. And in doing so, they create a sense of closeness without giving away the structure beneath their success. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. But those who lead from a Stoic center, they've already done the work of facing theirs. They don't bleed in front of others to feel seen. They've bled in solitude and emerged with calm clarity. The most effective minds don't hide behind perfection. They don't pretend to be untouched by fear or failure, but they also don't drown others in raw exposure. They understand that strength isn't pretending nothing happened. It's choosing what story you tell about it. A crack in the surface shown at the right time becomes a mirror for others. It says, I've been there, I've failed, I've doubted, but I kept going. That kind of story draws people in, not because it's perfect, but because it shows resilience without collapse. And once people think they've seen the full picture, they stop digging, they stop questioning. They assume the revealed flaw is the whole truth. But the strongest ones know the engine always stays behind the curtain. When someone admits a mistake early on, it disarms the audience. It lowers resistance. People relax when they no longer feel like they're talking to a performance. They start to trust. Not because they've been told to, but because the person in front of them feels reachable. That's the moment the dynamic changes. And that's exactly where leverage grows. Not by appearing untouchable, but by appearing solid and self-aware. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Controlled vulnerability is how modern Stoics choose to react. Not with denial, not with overexposure, but with a quiet, calculated display of truth that strengthens the foundation rather than shaking it. You don't need to reveal your deepest pain to be real. You don't need to cry publicly to be strong. What you need is the wisdom to know which parts of your story invite connection and which parts are meant for your own transformation. The people who build lasting influence understand that credibility comes from knowing what not to share just as much as it comes from what you do. It's not about hiding. It's about filtering with clarity, about preserving your internal stability so that your external message can land with strength. In leadership, if you never admit mistakes, people don't trust your success. But if you admit too many, people doubt your direction. The key is balance. A small failure shared confidently can build more trust than a long resume. But that failure must serve the mission. It must reflect intention, not randomness. And most importantly, it must leave no question that the person who lived through it is stronger now because of it. That's what Stoicism teaches. Not to deny emotion, but to direct it. Not to hide failure, but to use it. People admire those who are honest enough to admit they've failed, but composed enough to never let those failures define them. That composure is the difference. That's the line between vulnerability and emotional chaos. You're not opening the gates to your soul. You're offering a window, clean and framed, through which people can see enough to believe in you. Seneca once said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." But no one needs to watch you lift every weight. They just need to believe you've trained for the moment. This is why the most powerful presences often feel both human and untouchable at the same time. You see the edges of their story, but you don't quite reach the core. That's not manipulation. It's wisdom. It's the understanding that people don't need to see everything to believe something. They just need consistency. And when that consistency includes thoughtful imperfections, your image becomes both relatable and resilient. That's how perception becomes protection. There's another layer to this. When you show a flaw before others have the chance to point it out, you take away their power to use it against you. That move, quiet, humble, yet calculated, puts you in control of the narrative. You frame the story, you guide the tone, and you determine how the audience feels. Aristotle noted that character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion, and controlled vulnerability is character in motion. It's not just what you reveal, it's how you reveal it and why. Eventually, people stop looking for cracks in your armor because the ones you showed them already told a complete story. And beneath those visible flaws lies something unspoken but deeply felt. A core that's not afraid to be seen, but wise enough to choose when and how. That's the difference between exposure and power, between performance and presence, between noise and signal. Controlled vulnerability isn't about being raw for attention. It's about being honest with intention. It's about knowing your depth, facing your pain, and choosing how much of that pain serves the moment. It's about offering pieces of your journey that inspire rather than overwhelm. And in doing so, you remain steady, you remain trusted, and more importantly, you remain whole, not in the absence of flaws, but in the mastery of how they're carried. You don't have to shout to influence the world. You don't even have to be seen by everyone. What you do need, though, is a narrative, a consistent story that people can attach meaning to. Because the most powerful people aren't necessarily the ones who changed everything. They're the ones who convinced others how to see what was changing. They shaped belief, they shaped perception, and in doing so, they shaped reality. That's the quiet strength behind every long-lasting presence. They're not just working in the world, they're working on the way people interpret it. And once you understand that, you stop trying to be impressive and start becoming inevitable. A narrative isn't just a tagline, it's a rhythm, a philosophy, a structure of meaning that wraps around your actions and gives them direction. The strongest leaders don't move randomly, they move with a frame. Every public gesture, every repeated phrase, every value they embody becomes part of a larger pattern. And eventually, that pattern is no longer questioned, it's accepted. It becomes the lens through which everything else is viewed. And that's when the story stops being yours and starts living in the minds of others. It begins shaping how they think, how they invest, how they behave, because they've been given a belief to organize around. People crave structure, not just in systems, but in meaning. And when they're offered a clear, repeatable story that makes them feel like they understand what's happening, they attach themselves to it. Even if that story isn't entirely accurate, even if it's been curated with intention. What matters isn't whether every detail is factually perfect. What matters is whether the story holds up under pressure, whether it can be repeated, defended, and aligned with identity. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it magnetic. And the modern Stoic knows repetition isn't noise when it's grounded in consistency, it's reinforcement. Most people react to the moment. They try to be everything, everywhere, all at once. But that kind of scattered visibility has no core, no weight. What lasts is identity, not what you say once, but what you keep saying until the world starts saying it for you. And that's not manipulation, it's coherence. When your message, your behavior, and your mission all point in the same direction, your narrative becomes infrastructure. It becomes the unseen architecture that holds your influence together. And like infrastructure, it's not always visible, but everything around it depends on it. This is why you see leaders build a story of customer obsession, of discipline, of long-term vision. Over time, that story becomes their shield, their excuse, their advantage. When they're misunderstood, the narrative explains it. When they're challenged, the narrative absorbs it. And when they move in silence, the narrative fills the gap. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." And the narrative is how that being becomes visible, how others know what you stand for without needing constant explanation. There's something deeply strategic about someone who knows what story they're telling. They're not just reacting to trends, they're aligning every action to reinforce the image they've chosen. Not a fake image, but a distilled one, a version of themselves that holds weight, clarity, and emotional gravity. That gravity draws people in, and the more people orbit that story, the more energy it gains. It starts influencing without effort. People begin defending it, sharing it, living through it. And that's when a narrative stops being a message and becomes a system of belief. It's no accident that the most powerful figures in the world aren't always the most charismatic. Some of them are quiet, some are even awkward, but their narrative is sharp, it's clear, and it's anchored. Carl Jung said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." But when what you do and what you say are the same, over time you become undeniable. You become predictable in a way that comforts people. And comforting doesn't mean soft, it means stable. And stability is what people invest in, whether with their time, their trust, or their money. If you keep showing up as the same version of yourself, and that version is disciplined, clear-minded, and committed to something bigger than performance, you don't have to sell anything. You don't have to chase credibility. It starts accumulating around you like bricks, until one day you're not just seen, you're believed in. Not everyone gets there, because not everyone has the patience to tell the same story every day until it becomes real. They want novelty, but novelty doesn't build infrastructure. Repetition does. Not empty slogans, but lived values, consistent tone, familiar rhythm. A strong narrative doesn't just protect you, it scales you. It lets others carry your message even when you're not there. It trains perception. It creates momentum. And most importantly, it replaces uncertainty with clarity. That clarity becomes your reputation, and your reputation becomes the leverage you use to shape your surroundings. That's the Stoic play, not to control everything externally, but to master the one thing no one can take, your alignment. And when your alignment is wrapped in a story that others can feel, remember, and pass on, you stop being a figure. They start treating you like a foundation. Seneca wrote, "A good character, when established, is not easily overthrown." And narrative is how character becomes visible, not in the loud declarations, but in the quiet accumulation of consistent action, the repetition of restraint, the pattern of purpose. If you want to build something people rally around, you don't need to shout. You need to anchor. You need to choose your values, repeat them with discipline, and align every decision with that direction. Over time, people won't just hear what you say, they'll feel what you mean. And in that space between repetition and recognition, influence takes root. The world doesn't need more noise, it needs clarity. And clarity comes from living the story you want others to believe, again and again, until belief turns into trust, and trust turns into momentum. You don't have to change the whole world. You just have to change what the world sees when it looks at you. And once you do that, you don't chase gravity, you become it. Most people rush to act the moment they feel inspired. The second an idea forms, they want to launch it, speak it, broadcast it to the world. But the wisest minds, the ones shaped by discipline, by experience, by a Stoic philosophy of patience, know that the idea itself is only half the equation. The other half is timing, and timing isn't about guessing. It's about rhythm, not the rhythm of the market or the crowd, but the rhythm of readiness, yours and theirs. The most effective strategists don't just ask, "Is this idea good?" They ask, "Is the world ready to receive it?" Because they understand that even brilliance falls flat when it arrives too early or too late. What looks like luck from the outside is often the result of quiet observation. Months, sometimes years, of subtle tuning, watching not just for opportunities, but for the softening of resistance. These individuals don't just act when inspiration hits, they act when conditions align. Because they've learned through experience that momentum doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's built slowly, deliberately. Not through force, but through friction, through anticipation, through restraint. That restraint, uncomfortable as it may be, is often the difference between failure and something unstoppable. The Stoic mind is trained to understand the weight of action. It's not anti-movement, it's anti-impulse. There's a difference. Impulse burns fast and dies quickly. Alignment, on the other hand, moves with the weight of inevitability. And when you act in alignment, you don't need to convince anyone. The conditions you've prepared do the convincing for you. The pressure you've allowed to build beneath the surface gives your move impact. And the silence you've kept along the way makes people listen more closely when you finally speak. This is how influence works in its most mature form. It doesn't scream for attention. It waits until the silence is loud enough that the message lands without resistance. Think of how anticipation builds value. When you don't reveal everything at once, when you hold back just enough, people lean forward. They begin to expect. And expectation, if nurtured carefully, becomes a kind of energy that money can't buy. It's why those who speak too soon often fall flat, while those who speak with rhythm seem to shift everything with just a sentence. Carl Jung once said, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." And meaning doesn't just come from content, it comes from timing. The right words at the wrong time are noise. The right move made too early creates confusion. But when timing and message match, people don't just hear you, they remember you. That's not magic, it's design. It's the reward of those who wait, not passively, but intentionally. Timing isn't about delay for its own sake. It's about stacking variables until the outcome becomes almost inevitable. It's knowing when the culture is bending toward your direction, when the resistance in a person's mind is softening, when your own clarity has sharpened enough to cut through noise. The Stoic strategist understands that a move made under pressure must not be hurried. It must be prepared. And when that preparation meets the right window, what follows feels effortless, even if it took years to earn. There's a kind of power that comes from not needing to act just because you can, from being able to wait without anxiety, to watch the world sprint and stumble while you observe patterns, behaviors, emotions, not to manipulate them, but to recognize when they're ready. Ready to hear, ready to shift, ready to follow. And when that readiness is sensed, your movement lands like gravity, not suggestion. Because you've aligned your action with conditions, not just emotions. This kind of awareness can't be faked. It comes from knowing yourself deeply enough to resist your own urgency, from being willing to look foolish for waiting, from ignoring the crowd when they say, "You should have moved already." But they don't see what you see. They don't feel what you feel. They haven't spent time building pressure in silence. And when the moment does come, they call it luck. But it wasn't luck. It was rhythm. It was you understanding the terrain better than they did. Seneca wrote, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult." But daring doesn't mean rushing. It means knowing when the move is not just bold, but wise. When the silence has served its purpose. When the preparation has matured into inevitability. And when that moment arrives, there's no hesitation. Because you're not improvising. You're executing something you've been silently rehearsing for longer than anyone knows. Most people don't train for timing. They train for reaction. They respond quickly, hoping that speed will compensate for lack of depth. But speed without awareness is waste. The Stoic doesn't fear missing a moment. They fear forcing one. And that fear keeps them focused, not frozen, focused. Because they know that when the moment is real, the move will be obvious. And that kind of patience creates space for sharper action. Not slower, sharper. Over time, this builds trust. People learn that when you act, it matters. That your silence isn't hesitation, it's calibration. And when your moves are few but meaningful, your influence compounds. You become known not just for what you do, but for when you do it. That reputation becomes part of your rhythm, and that rhythm becomes your signal in a world overwhelmed with noise. This is the discipline behind quiet strength. It's not about delaying life. It's about mastering the flow of it. Knowing that timing isn't just something you wait for, it's something you build, slowly, carefully, without panic. And when the alignment is real, even the smallest step can shift the entire landscape. Most people spend their lives stretching in every direction, trying to be more like the successful people they admire, trying to copy what works, chasing someone else's version of power. But in doing that, they exhaust themselves. They dilute their focus. They become a little bit of everything and the master of nothing. The strongest minds don't operate that way. They don't try to become something they're not. They start by identifying what's already inside them, then refining it with brutal honesty. They know self-knowledge isn't soft introspection. It's strategy, because once you know your nature, you stop pretending, you stop forcing, and that shift frees up an enormous amount of energy that used to be wasted on fitting in. There's something incredibly grounding about someone who knows who they are, not as an image, but as a rhythm. Someone who doesn't need to explain themselves because their actions have already done that. Someone who doesn't mimic trends, doesn't chase opportunities that aren't aligned, and doesn't apologize for their approach because it's rooted in something stable. That kind of clarity is rare, not because it's complicated, but because most people never slow down enough to actually ask themselves the deeper questions. They build strategies before they build self-awareness. But the Stoic path flips that completely. Strategy is the outcome of knowing who you are, not the other way around. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That idea may sound philosophical, but in practice it's deeply tactical. Because once you understand your temperament, your impulses, your emotional triggers, your strengths, you can build systems around them. You don't resist your nature, you use it. If you're chaotic by nature, you don't shame it, you direct it. You turn chaos into momentum by anchoring it to a mission. If you're disciplined, you build rhythm into your days until your schedule becomes your second spine. And if you're patient, you learn to weaponize that patience, not as passivity, but as timing. The point isn't to become someone else, it's to become so aligned with your nature that everything you do begins to feel inevitable. This is where power becomes deeply sustainable, not loud, not performative, but real. Because you're not constantly battling yourself, you're not trying to suppress what's natural, you're learning to channel it. And once you do, your external results start matching your internal wiring. That alignment creates consistency, and consistency becomes identity. Eventually, people stop seeing your efforts and start feeling your presence. Not because you've mastered everything, but because you've stopped leaking energy through contradiction. What you say, what you believe, and how you behave all come from the same root, and that makes you unshakable. Not in perfection, but in integrity. The Stoics weren't interested in being all things. They were interested in being one thing. Well, they knew that inner stability is more valuable than external applause. That most people crumble, not because the world is too heavy, but because their identity is too scattered. So they asked themselves again and again, who am I really? And what would remain if everything was stripped away? That's where true power begins. Because if you can operate from that place, you're no longer building your life around reputation or perception. You're building it from the inside out. And once the inside is stable, the outside starts bending to match it. Epictetus said, "Know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly." That isn't a call for self-indulgence. It's a call for precision. It's a reminder that imitation is expensive and authenticity is efficient. When you know your nature, you stop wasting time on paths that were never meant for you. You stop borrowing confidence from other people's blueprints, and instead, you build your own frame, quietly, piece by piece, until it fits you so well that no one else can wear it. That frame becomes your advantage. Not because it's flashy, but because it works, because it endures, because it's real. In a world of constant comparison, staying true to yourself sounds like a soft principle, but it's the hardest and most strategic move you can make. It requires rejecting the noise that tells you to be more this or less that. It means staying in your lane even when someone else's lane looks faster. It's trusting that depth will always outlast speed. That permanence comes from understanding, not performance. And that over time, the person who knows who they are becomes harder and harder to move, not because they resist change, but because they integrate it without losing their center. This kind of self-mastery isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing what you need, what triggers you, what restores you, what environments bring out your best, and which ones poison your clarity. It's about designing your systems around that awareness so that every decision, every habit, every move is filtered through alignment. And when that alignment becomes habitual, you stop trying to get back on track. You are the track. And staying on it is no longer about willpower. It becomes a byproduct of your environment. That's not accidental. That's design. Over time, this way of moving through the world makes you not just effective, but trustworthy. People sense when someone is aligned. They sense when your confidence comes from understanding, not imitation. And they respond to it. They feel safer around it. They believe in it, not because you ask them to, but because they can feel that your life isn't reacting, it's driven. And that drive doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to explain itself. It just keeps moving, with purpose, with rhythm, and without apology. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, and wisdom, when paired with clarity, becomes leverage." Not the kind that manipulates others, but the kind that bends time, focus, and energy around what truly matters. Self-knowledge becomes the filter that protects your momentum. And when others are burning out trying to be everything, you'll still be standing, because you chose to be you, fully and unapologetically. And you built systems to make that choice sustainable. That's the quiet strength no one can take from you. It doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to be real. And when it is, you don't chase identity, you live it. You don't manage your image, you embody it. You stop exhausting yourself trying to catch up and start watching your life unfold on terms that actually belong to you. Because at the center of every powerful presence is a mind that's done the work of knowing itself and built a life that protects what it found. Real power isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you are and choosing to live like it matters. The most unshakable people you'll ever meet aren't chasing the world. They're anchored in something deeper, something still, something true. If that's the path you're on or want to be, there's another video waiting for you now. Watch it and keep building the kind of mind that doesn't need permission to lead. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.